Today at the National Press Club, Prime Minister Scott Morrison. After a year no one would want to repeat it, the focus is starting to turn to what the post-COVID world will look like and how quickly Australia's economy will recover. To kick off the parliamentary year, Scott Morrison with the National Press Club address.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia and today's Westpac address. My name's Laura Tingle. I'm the new club president and I'm also the chief political correspondent for 7:30. Federal Parliament resumes tomorrow, so it's appropriate that our first guest of the year is the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who's been a regular speaker here with various ministerial hats on and as Prime Minister. Before we hear from him today, I just mentioned that we are starting the year with a bang, hosting not just the PM this week, but also on Wednesday, Reserve Bank Governor Phil Lowe. If you are following the conversation online, you can find us on Twitter. Our user handle is @PressClubAust and our hashtag is NPC. Everyone, please welcome the Prime Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Laura, and to everybody who's here today. Can I, of course, begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, their elders past and present, and the future. Can I also acknowledge any veterans who are with us today, serving men and women of our Australian Defence Forces, and say to them, thank you for your service. Can I also acknowledge today the beautiful Abdullah and Saka families on this first National I Forgive Day, as we remember their four beautiful angels, Anthony, Angelique, Sienna and Veronique, who were taken from us this day a year ago. I also welcome the very many of our colleagues, my colleagues who are here today, of course led by the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg. It's great to have you all here today, and I acknowledge you all and the great job you've been doing and I know you will do over the course of this year. In 2020, I said we would not let this virus break our Australian spirit. It hasn't, and it won't. I said we always believed ourselves as Australians to be a strong people, but we were about to find out just how strong we really were, and we did. We found our generation the same strength, good humour, resilience and mateship that enabled past generations to rise to the challenges of their time. Today, Australia stands out across the world in response to the pandemic. We continue to report zero or negligible cases in community transmission. We have mercifully so far avoided a third wave over this summer. We have the third lowest mortality rate from the pandemic amongst G20 nations, and our record on saving lives is matched, importantly, by our record in saving livelihoods, where we have outperformed economically the world's most advanced economies. With more than 90% of the jobs lost already back, our comeback has not just begun, it's gathering pace. As Chris Richardson from Deloitte Access Economics observed earlier this month, you'd rather be here than almost anywhere else. Now, that's my default setting, I've got to say, regardless of the circumstances. I'm sure it is for most Australians. It's very true now. There is still much more to do, though. The pandemic is still raging. It's not petering out. The virus hasn't gone anywhere. Indeed, it's morphing into new and more virulent strains. So we must remain vigilant. We have all learned a lot over the past 12 months, and we have also led the way in so many areas. We must take these lessons into 2021 and continue to make our own way through this crisis, our Australian way, that respects our liberal democratic values, our expert institutions, our business-led market economy, and the responsibilities and accountabilities of our federal system. An Australian way where our decisions to protect public health are guided by our respect for science and expert medical advice. I acknowledge Brendan Murphy, who's here amongst us today. An economic response that's driven, as the Treasurer and I outlined, by clear principles to navigate uncertainty. A response that is proportionate, timely, scalable, targeted, that is aligned with other arms of policy, in particular monetary policy, that uses existing delivery mechanisms wherever possible to avoid the mistakes and delays of the past, and a response where emergency measures are temporary and accompanied by a clear fiscal exit strategy. You can't run the Australian economy on taxpayers' money forever. And finally, a response that lifts productivity to enable the Australian economy to sustain an even stronger growth trajectory on the other side. But above all, our Australian way depends most of all on the character and resilience of Australians. Each of us understanding we have a contribution to make. And for that, I say thank you to the Australian people. Australians have made the difference. So, to our focus in the year ahead, there are 5 priorities, areas that I want to speak about today in relation to 2021. First of those, suppress the virus and deliver the vaccine. Secondly, cement our economic recovery to create jobs and more jobs. 3, to continue to guarantee the essential services that Australians rely on. Fourthly, to protect and secure Australians' interests in a challenging world. And finally, to care for our country. So let's talk about the virus and the vaccine. We enter 2021 in a relatively strong position, and I acknowledge the great leadership of our Health Minister, Greg Hunt, in taking us through this difficult period. Our 2020 achievements have bought valuable time on vaccines to ensure they are safe and can be effectively rolled out across our population. But even with the rollout of the vaccine, there can be no let-up in the 3 vital suppression measures that have served Australia so well in 2020 and must be the focus of a continuous improvement throughout 2021. Our international border restrictions and robust quarantine system, our high rates of testing, contact tracing systems, and our management of outbreaks in localised hotspots, and physical distancing and sound hygiene practices. In 2021, these suppression measures, which must be exercised, I stressed, in a balanced way to also protect jobs and livelihoods, will be complemented by the COVID-19 vaccines. Now, this will be one of the largest logistics exercises ever seen in Australia. We'll be vaccinating more than 25 million people, having secured over 140 million doses, enough to cover the Australian population several times over. The TGA recently approved the Fisa vaccine for people aged over 16 years here in Australia. And unlike other jurisdictions around the world, this was a formal approval, not an emergency one. We are one of only a handful of countries to have gone through such a comprehensive and thorough level of oversight to ensure the vaccines are safe. And we have wisely planned for the unexpected. That is why we took the decision to take out the insurance of securing our own sovereign supply of vaccines by investing in COVID-19 vaccine production right here in Australia. Australia is one of a small handful of countries, once again, to have sovereign vaccine manufacturing capacity. And subject to TGA approval, we expect to be able to supply COVID-19 vaccines to the entire Australian population through CSL's manufacturing plant in Melbourne. Now, today, we are releasing further details of the government's COVID-19 vaccine and treatment strategy, setting out how vaccines will be rolled out to the Australian people. Our aim is to offer all Australians the opportunity to be vaccinated by October of this year, commencing in just a few weeks' time. Now, our guidance, I stress, is that first vaccinations remain on track to be in Australia, ready for shipping and distribution to priority groups from late February. However, the final commencement date will ultimately depend on some of these developments we're seeing overseas, which we will continue to monitor closely and update the Australian people accordingly. Now, the strategy is backed by an initial allocation of around $1.9 billion in new support for the vaccine rollout. Now, that's on top of the more than $4.4 billion allocated for vaccine purchases, medical research and support for our partner countries. It's a big job. This brings the Australian government's total support for COVID-19 vaccines and treatments to $6.3 billion. Now, while working closely with our partners in the states and territories, we are also working with the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners and the Australian Medical Association, the big logistics companies like DHL and Linfox, and general practices and community pharmacies from around Australia to administer the vaccines. We'll have thousands of points of presence across Australia: hospitals, GPs, pharmacies, respiratory clinics, Aboriginal health services, and a specialist surge workforce. This will ensure we get the vaccine to all Australians, including people in rural, remote and very remote areas, and others who are hard to reach. Now, initially, we will need to prioritise the most vulnerable and those likely to experience a serious disease, as well as frontline health and care workers and other essential services workers. We will then extend vaccination to the balance of the population as quickly as possible, building towards protecting the entire community by the end of this year. We want as many Australians vaccinated as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. The COVID-19 vaccines will be made free to all Australians, and we strongly encourage all Australians to get vaccinated. We are working with states and territories, and we're providing guidance for employees, employers, customers and industries on the vaccine shortly. And as Maurice Payne knows, as Zeta knows also, we have not forgotten our overseas partners, our family here in our own region. Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister for International Development in the Pacific are already working with their counterparts on a dedicated vaccines program around the needs and health systems of our Pacific family and Southeast Asian neighbours. Secondly, on the economy and jobs, the comeback in Australia's economy is already underway and betters the experience of most advanced economy nations in the world today. Now, Australians are now voting with their feet to join the economic recovery that is occurring here in Australia. The unemployment rate has fallen from 7.5% in July last year down to 6.6% in December. And importantly, the effective rate of unemployment that takes into account hours reduced to zero and people leaving the workforce has also fallen to now be in line with the headline rate at 6.6%, after hitting almost 15% at the height of the crisis. Almost 800,000 jobs were created in the past 7 months, and it's very pleasing to see women taking up the majority of those jobs. 90% of the jobs lost to COVID-19, as I said before, had returned by year's end. And our participation rate has recovered, and it's reached a record high of 66.2%, while consumer and business confidence has recovered as restrictions have come off, and this will be further supported by the vaccine rollout. Our task now is to continue our economic recovery by sticking to our economic recovery plan and, importantly, exercising the fiscal discipline necessary to ensure that we do not overburden future generations and continue to spend taxpayers' money wisely. We are not running a blank cheque budget. While our medium-term strategy remains to stabilise and reduce debt, low interest rates are alleviating debt servicing pressures as lower rates not only apply to new issuances, but our pre-existing debt as it rolls over. Now, because our debt is getting cheaper to service at a faster rate than it is getting larger, that means our net interest bill will decline as a share of the economy. We've got this. And as this chart shows, our $251 billion in direct economic support, unprecedented in this country, while largely delivered in 2020, It has a long tail in providing ongoing support. It's put gas in the tank. Treasury analysis has shown that our direct economic support measures are expected to result in economic activity being 5% higher in 2020-21 and 4.5% higher in 2021-22, compared to if no support was provided at all. Now, we know that the temporary JobKeeper payments and our many other supports have helped to boost families and businesses balance their balance sheets by more than $200 billion. This has been a game changer like no other we have seen in this country, JobKeeper, for millions of Australians. It saved not just livelihoods, it saved lives. There is now a large sum of money available to be spent across the economy, and that's what's going to help create jobs and maintain the momentum of our economic recovery. And that is where it needs to be right now, those funds in Australians' pockets. Indeed, in 2021, the government will continue putting more money back into Australians' pockets, keeping more of what they've earned to support their families and businesses. The low and middle income tax offset, the tax cut from 26 to 25% for small and medium-sized businesses, full expensing for new business investments, creating jobs, and our lost carryback, providing a much-needed cash flow boost for those businesses who continue to do it tough. And from today, the first round of JobMaker hiring credit claims can be lodged. It's important to remember, employment of those aged 15 to 34, as you see in this chart, remains 3.3% below pre-COVID levels, while those aged over 35 are back at their pre-COVID levels. Working through the National Cabinet in 2021, this will be a year of generational change in our skills and vocational education sector. This is a big piece. It includes $4 billion to help employers retain and take on new apprentices and trainees through wage subsidies, with support for up to 100,000 new apprentices. Our national $1 billion Job Trainer Fund is providing over 300,000 training places to help reskill workers for the COVID recovery. And a new skills agreement to provide more transparency and better link funding to actual skills needs will be done this year. Minister Cash is going to be very, very busy. We're also providing for up to 30,000 more university places and 50,000 more short courses this year. And in the Parliament, we are seeking that support for the changes we believe are necessary to help businesses get more people back into work in the post-COVID recovery for the changes we need to make to industrial relations. You know, nearly $29 billion in infrastructure investment will hit the deck this financial year and next. That includes bring forwards as part of our pandemic recovery plan, which will especially assist rural and regional communities, including our new road safety initiative, which I know the Deputy Prime Minister is especially passionate about. Investments made through the National Water Grid will add further to this effort. But our economic recovery plan, I should stress, is underpinned by something incredibly important, and that is delivering affordable and reliable energy in a way that positions Australia to be successful in the lower and ultimately net zero emissions global economy of the future. Our goal is to reach net zero emissions as soon as possible, and preferably by 2050. But when we get there, whether in Australia or anywhere else, that will depend on the advances made in science and technology needed to commercially transform not just advanced economies and countries, but the developing world as well. Science and technology will, as it always has in these areas, set the pace. And in the developing world, this is important because it is in those countries that dominate the emissions horizon. In Australia, we will do this by investing and partnering in technology breakthroughs needed to reduce and offset emissions in a way that enables our heavy industry in particular, industry more broadly, jobs and living standards, especially in regional Australia, to continue and to keep energy costs down. In Australia, my government will not tax our way to net zero emissions. I will not put that cost on Australians. And I will particularly not ask regional Australians to carry that burden. Getting to net zero, whether here or anywhere else, should be about technology, not taxes and higher prices. In Australia, we're not waiting on this. We're getting on with it. Emissions fell by 3% in the year to June 20, to their lowest level since 1998, meaning we are now nearly 17% below 2005 levels. These are the facts. Now, this compares to reductions of approximately 9% on average across the OECD, 1% in New Zealand, and less than 1% in Canada. So we're not waiting. This year, our $18 billion technology investment roadmap gets going, and I commend Minister Fatala for the great job he's done in pulling this together, with a $1.9 billion commitment to develop clean energy technologies such as hydrogen, green steel, and the CCS, carbon capture storage, and I'd add use to that too. And we are taking the roadmap global, pursuing ambitious partnerships with countries like Japan, the United States, the United Kingdom, Korea, and Singapore. Already begun. We are implementing our multi-billion dollar energy and emissions reduction agreement with New South Wales, and other states are following. Agreements are in place to accelerate major transmission projects in New South Wales and Tasmania, with Victoria, South Australia to follow this year. We are building Snowy 2.0. We are rolling out our $200 million program to build new diesel storage facilities. The Beetaloo Basin Strategic Basin Plan has been released. 4 more are coming. The pipeline market will be further improved this year, as will the liquidity of the Wallumbilla gas hub. All important changes. Affordable and reliable energy is also the cornerstone of Minister Andrews' $1.5 billion manufacturing strategy. Now, this plan focuses, because I spoke to it here, on priority areas of resources technology and critical minerals processing, food and beverage, medical products, recycling and clean energy, defence and space. Our priorities are clear. We're investing, encouraging others to do the same. This will be backed up by the implementation of our $5.3 billion digital business plan that will accelerate 5G application development, build the digital skills of our small and medium-sized enterprises, strengthen our cyber security, as well as expanding the digital identity program. And of course, we will continue to work across government to cut red and green tape, and that includes the single-touch approvals for environmental assessments with state governments that are before the Parliament. Guaranteeing the essential services that Australians rely on has always been a passion of mine, and you'll recall it from when I spoke about it as Treasurer. The economy is for something, and it provides the services Australians rely on. In 2020, our health, disability, aged care, social services and education systems successfully adapted to a new COVID operating environment, and I thank all of those Australians who made that possible. From the front line to those in the management offices, everybody had to change a lot and they had to move fast, and they did an extraordinary job. And they were aided by unprecedented federal funding to help them get that job done, and I know it was appreciated. We were doing our bit, they were doing their bit. Now, this will continue as we manage the ongoing impacts of COVID-19, but this will not, through the pandemic, interrupt our pre-pandemic agenda of the investments to guarantee those many essential services that Australians rely on. The additional funding for public hospitals and schools, that's continuing. Guaranteeing Medicare, the listing of affordable medicines that save lives through the PBS record investments, that continues. And the continued rollout of the NDIS, which, by the way, now has approximately 412,000 participants, an increase of around 100,000 participants just over the past 12 months. That's what getting on with the job looks like in a pandemic, and I commend Minister Robert for leading that process. In our 2021 year, our government will deliver, though, step change reforms in some important services area, aged care, mental health, while continuing the work of closing the gap for Indigenous Australians. In this year's budget, we will deliver the government's response to the Aged Care Royal Commission's final report. A Royal Commission I initiated. The response will add to the significant steps already taken, including the additional 59,105 home care packages I've announced and put in place since I announced the Royal Commission. That's a 47% increase in in-home care places since we announced the Royal Commission. It's around tripled since we first came to government. Key focus of our response to the final report will be growing and upskilling the aged care workforce. Workforce challenges are some of the biggest challenges Australia face economically, and it's central to both our economic agenda and our services delivery agenda to meet demand. COVID has only strengthened my commitment also to mental health and suicide prevention towards zero goal. This year there will be a new national agreement on mental health and suicide prevention, and I'm greatly encouraged by the strong support I'm receiving from premiers and chief ministers on this as well. We're looking forward to moving on to those issues as soon as we're able to come to agreement on those matters. It will provide a foundation for a comprehensive, coordinated, consumer-focused and compassionate mental health and suicide prevention system as we learn also the lessons of COVID. After bringing together a landmark new national agreement on closing the gap with peak Indigenous groups, that was a big change. Later this year, we will release those fully funded further implementation plans that put that closing the gap agenda into place. To protect and secure Australians' interests has always been a core, if not the most important, objective and responsibility of the federal government. It's made even more difficult in the challenging world in which we live. The challenges of COVID-19 are not only testing us at home. Australia must use its agency to shape the world in our interests. This starts in our own region. This week I will join Pacific family leaders at the Pacific Islands Forum, where we can speak to another strong year of delivery in our Pacific Step Up program, led of course by the Minister for Foreign Affairs and the Minister for the Pacific. The same is true for our engagement with ASEAN, which sits at the heart of Australia's vision for the Indo-Pacific. With Indonesia, we will continue to implement our new IACPA Economic Partnership Agreement and provide support with their vaccine program. We have also recently upgraded our relationships with Vietnam, Thailand and Malaysia just last week, and have a new digital commerce agreement with Singapore. For the third year in a row, I've been invited as a guest to the G7 Summit, which will be held in June in the United Kingdom. Now, this is an important recognition that Australia's contribution is valued. Cooperation between like-minded liberal democracies, market economy nations has never been more important than it is today, and that is why I asked Matthias Cormann to be Australia's candidate for the role of Secretary-General of the OECD, and we're doing pretty well. As the world grapples with the recovery from COVID-19, this grouping, the OECD of 37 market-based economies, has a fundamental role to play in keeping markets open, bolstering the rules-based system and modernising rules for the digital economy. The geopolitical environment will remain very challenging, and I am confident that our alliance with the United States, which will turn 70 this year, will grow even stronger in partnership with the Biden administration. The defence relationship will remain the bedrock of that partnership, as we know, and our commitment to playing our part is reflected in our pledge to invest $270 billion on defence capability over the next decade. Our work in the Quad, which embraces the US, Japan and India, has been deepened and broadened, as evidenced by mine and Minister Payne's recent visits to Japan. Our cooperation with the Five Eyes nations has also grown, extending into new areas of common interest, particularly with the Treasury's involvement, areas in the economy and technology, and we need to work with our close partners to develop and protect sensitive critical technologies, including quantum computing and artificial intelligence. We will also need to secure critical mineral supply chains for the new clean energy technologies of the future. The evolution of the United States' relationship with China will shape the political environment in the foreseeable future, as it indeed has in the past. For our part, we remain committed to engaging with China. Our peoples have benefited greatly, both ways, from the depth of our economic ties. But it's not surprising there will be differences between two nations with such different economic and political systems. Our task is to ensure that such differences do not deny Australia and China from realising the mutual benefits of that partnership consistent with our own respective national sovereign interests. China's outlook and the nature of China's external engagement, both regionally and globally, it's changed since our comprehensive strategic partnership was formed, and going further back than that, certainly in the decades that have led up till now. We cannot pretend that things are as they were. The world has changed. An enduring partnership requires both of us to adapt to these new realities and talk with each other, and that begins with dialogue at both ministerial and leader level. A dialogue focus not on concessions, but on areas of mutual benefit, committed to finding a way for our nations and peoples to beneficially engage in the future. Now we, of course, Australia, we're open to such a process. We will continue to create new opportunities for our exporters. I know Minister Tehan is chomping at the bit, already out there, via a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom and their potential involvement in an expanded Trans-Pacific partnership. And I thank Minister Birmingham for the great job that he has done setting up all of those opportunities for Dan to now go and complete. And it's also about accelerating our negotiations on an ambitious and comprehensive agreement with the European Union, effectively targeting barriers for agricultural goods. And as always, we will keep Australians safe, countering the threat of terrorism and extremism with stronger laws and record investments in key agencies, countering the threat of foreign interference and espionage in defence of our national sovereignty, keeping our borders secure, taking down organised criminal gangs, and protecting families, businesses and national infrastructure safe from malicious cyber activity with our record $1.7 billion investment in cyber security. It's a big agenda. Finally, caring for our country. You know, for millennia, Indigenous Australians have lived the principles of caring for country. And I believe those principles must underpin how our government exercises our environmental stewardship. In addition to carrying on the work on emissions reduction, climate resilience, implementing our export ban on waste plastic, paper, glass and tyres, and rolling out $600 million in funding for new and upgraded recycling facilities around the country to build a world-class waste management sector, this year we will turn the spotlight on agriculture and the environment, soils, water, our oceans. Australia's soils are estimated to store some 3.5% of the total global stocks of soil organic carbon, against our 5.2% of global land area. Native vegetation clearance and poor soil management have and continue to result in the loss of soil organic carbon. Now, that's what makes the National Soil Strategy so important. The strategy will be delivered as part of the 2021-22 budget the Treasurer will hand down later this year. It will include practical actions and focus on the development of a national monitoring program to assess the condition of Australian soils, research and development, and to assist with implementation, capacity building and extension. It will be a fitting legacy, I believe, to the great work and advocacy of our former Governor-General and National Soils Advocate, the late Major General Michael Jeffrey. The National Soil Strategy is one pillar of our Ag 2030 plan that's backing the sector's ambition to be a $100 billion industry. The importance of investing in the health of our soil, water and landscapes was borne out by the recent independent review of our national environmental legislation and by the findings of the Bushfires Royal Commission. And while we have always contended with is increasing and more severe droughts, floods, fires and storms, so we will continue to harness the natural resourcefulness and innovation of Australians to ensure we adapt and build resilience to these strategies. This will be a project that both Minister Littleproud and Mr Lee will work on together. In 2021, we will also continue the rollout of the $1 billion Phase 2 of the National Land Care Program that supports regional communities through controlling weeds, improving soil health, fencing off sensitive waterways and remnant vegetation and replanting species. Practical stuff that makes a big difference. 2021 will also see the first phase of our Healthy Oceans Plan giving effect to our commitment to sustainably managing 100% of the ocean within our national waters. The ocean supports, almost 400,000 jobs in Australia, and our unprecedented $1.9 billion commitment to reduce runoff and pollution flowing into the reef, control the crown of thorn starfish and deploy cutting-edge science to secure the reef's resilience to marine heat waves is more than just a drop in the ocean. 100% of fisheries managed by the Australian government having a sustainable management plan in place. And we are supporting, of course, our Indo-Pacific neighbours to manage waste, protect coral reefs and mangroves and crack down on illegal fishing. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been very patient. Despite one of the toughest years in our nation's history, Australia stands strong at the start of 2021. There is still, though, much to do, but we know our comeback is underway. The actions we take this year will continue to recover what has been lost and enable us to build again for the future. In 2021, I'm supremely confident and optimistic that we will continue as a people to make our own Australian way through the challenges ahead, and that Australians will once again emerge stronger, safer and together on the other side. Thank you very much for your attention.